Thanks so much. Those of you who are tuned in already. For others, we'll give them a couple of minutes here to filter in. Good to see everyone. Where's everyone coming from while we're waiting on the crowd to get here? Go ahead and comment where you're watching from. I always love to see if we got people from around the world. I'm coming at you from Denver, Colorado, so would love to see how far away we can get in terms of viewers. That's always a game I like to play with my other solutions engineers. See who can get the widest reach around the globe. We got somebody from Austria and the Netherlands. Okay, I think Austria is technically a little farther away from me from the Netherlands, but you're close. You're close. We do have a team in Amsterdam that I love the people there. We got some France. There we go. Okay, I was in France in 2019. Love the area. Visited Dijon and Nancy. Wonderful place. Peru. That's a place I haven't been. Definitely want to see Peru sometime. We got a bunch of folks. We got Canada, UK near London, Italy, Ukraine. Welcome from Ukraine, Slava Ukraini. We've got Pennsylvania, we've got Barcelona, and more from France, Central America, India, Luxembourg. Wow, fantastic. And Florida. Hey, nothing wrong with that. I dig it. I dig it. It's great to see. Oh, and we had somebody who was Colorado Springs a few years back. That's fantastic too. Madrid and Spain, Costa Rica. Wow, we got folks from all over. Sri Lanka. I think that might be Sri Lanka and India. That's pretty far back, though. I think I recognize a couple of those names, so I'm not sure that necessarily counts. Konya, Turkey. That's a first here. Czech Republic, living in the Dominican Republic. Excellent. Wow, so folks from all over tuning in. So great to see everyone. Thanks so much for popping in today and taking a look at this talk that we're going to give. And I hope everyone gets something useful out of this. We'll go ahead and get started now that we've given it a couple of minutes for folks to pop in. Oh, Botswana, that's a fun one. Argentina, UK, Botswana. I love the name Botswana. It's such a fun name to say. Just one of the more fun country names to utter. Botswana. Just rolls off the tongue. Fantastic. So we'll go ahead and get started. And if we can go ahead and share my slides, we'll go ahead and start clicking through that. Excellent. So today we're going to talk about stuff that's beyond crypto, right? So how blockchain is taking over the business world. So what do I mean by beyond crypto? Well, I mean, we're going to talk about stuff that doesn't have anything to do with Bitcoin, doesn't have anything to do with even the Ethereum, coin itself, cryptocurrency itself. We're going to be talking about the business applications of blockchain, not necessarily the investment applications of blockchain, right? So we're going to be focusing on how you can leverage blockchain technologies in your business or in businesses that you work with. And make recommendations to them that are intelligent based on the capabilities that blockchain has. So I want to say at the start, please don't hesitate to put questions in the chat throughout this. If you see something come up and you're like, hey, I really want more details on that, I would love to chat more about it, and I'd be happy to pause and go into more detail right then and there. I love to have interactive webinars, things like that. So please don't hesitate to ask those good questions. All right, so I wanted to start out with a quote here. This is from Accenture, so they're kind of a big deal. This is Prasad Sankaran, who said, at Accenture, blockchain is driving business transformation in virtually every industry, from aerospace to not-for-profits. Blockchain's unique characteristics are helping to reinvent complex supply chains, improve business processes, and expand the reach and veracity of our digital identities. And those are really the three big areas we'll kind of talk about today in terms of some of the things that you can do with blockchain. But I wanted to bring this up, and we'll have a couple other quotes throughout this call, but I wanted to bring this up because this is a senior managing director at Accenture. And if you don't know what Accenture does, they consult for all sorts of companies across every industry. And they are seeing at the managing director level that blockchain is transforming things. It's really changing things. right? And you'll notice this, Prasad doesn't have blockchain in his title, right? That's not part of what he does as a mandate. It's just he, in the intelligent cloud and infrastructure space, recognizes that blockchain is growing. It's becoming a huge thing. It's becoming a big part of everything that they do. Now, I know what you're thinking. All right. So, okay, I've heard this before. A lot of people have talked about blockchain for years. They've been talking about blockchain and crypto, and we've seen all the hype and things like that. All right. So, it's true. There's a lot of buzz. All right. With any new popular technology, there's going to be a lot of buzz. There's going to be too much buzz. So much buzz that it can be hard to tell what's true. It'd be hard to separate fact from fiction. Well, I'm here to tell you the emperor is wearing clothes. All right. Blockchain is real. It's here to stay. There's a lot of cool stuff that it can do, and it's going to be a core piece of a lot of technologies that we have moving forward. So I want you to understand that it is important. It is here to stay, but we're caught up on the flashy stuff right now. We're caught up on the crypto because that's the huge market. And it means that some of these other use cases are overshadowed by the fact that you can make a bunch of money by just running a bunch of staking nodes, which isn't something we'll focus on today. But that's why a lot of these business cases have been overshadowed, right? These techniques that are used in blockchain can be used for a lot more than procedurally generated monkeys, and I'm going to tell you how exactly that works. And I know I'm throwing some shade there. I apologize, but I have to occasionally. When you've worked this closely with this space for so long, you do kind of start to poke fun at the absurdity of some of these things. All right, so what we're going to cover here today. First, we're going to cover the business case for blockchain, which is really, the bulk of the really interesting stuff that we have to talk about. We're going to talk about the consensus mechanism, kind of what that means in a business context. We're going to talk about what trustless means and why that's so useful. We're going to talk about tokens and how they are more than you think they are. We're going to talk about smart contracts. And then we're going to talk about the risks. Right, we're going to have a portion where we talk about, what can go wrong with blockchain right now, what you should be worried about running into. You don't want to run headlong off a cliff. And then we're going to talk about the future, a little bit about the future of blockchain, right? So just a few things about where we think blockchain is going, and I'm going to ask you guys to participate in that. Now, to be clear, I've spent a lot of time head down in the blockchain space, but it's a huge space. There's a lot of stuff that I won't be aware of, that I haven't heard of, new cool technologies that may be taking over that I haven't seen. So I'm going to invite everyone at the end to shout out about their cool favorite blockchain project, not necessarily cryptocurrency, but favorite blockchain project that they think really has legs and that they think could go the distance. So we'll do that little participation hopefully at the end if you guys are still awake. We'll see if you're still awake. So some things we won't be talking about. We're not going to talk about mining. It's not really the business case part of this, right? We're not going to talk about cryptocurrency. It is a critical part of many blockchains, but it's not necessarily the business focus that we care about here today. We're not going to talk about Web3 very much. Now, I know some people see this bullet here that says it's just not here yet, and they may feel all sorts of ways about that. Hi from Nigeria. Very nice to see you. They may feel all sorts of ways about me saying Web3 is not here yet. And to be frank, I get it, right? I totally get it. Web3 is a cool technology, and I think it will eventually be doing cool things. Oh, in Ghana, that's fun. Another fun name to say. But Web3 is still in its nascent stages. It's still a technology in search of a problem, right? So when we talk about Web3, we're talking about distributed web applications, and frankly, we're pretty good at distributed web applications today in the industry. So this is one of those things where there will be uses, and I see certainly use cases in terms of anti-censorship, right? In terms of running networks that aren't beholden to a single provider. Absolutely a use case. From a business perspective, I haven't seen it yet. So that's why we're not gonna talk about Web3 very much. And we're also not going to talk about the fundamentals of blockchain technology. We're not going to go into how hashing works and how these ledgers are put together and what the actual blocks and chains are, right? You've heard that explanation a bunch before. It didn't make sense the first time you heard it. It doesn't make sense now. And I'm just kidding. Obviously, it does make sense. There are sensible parts of that, but it is a complex tool, and the different ways we're using it makes it even more complex. So we're not going to go into the details of exactly how blockchain works on a fundamental level. So I hope that's okay with everyone. But again, please feel free to ask any questions you have at any point. I'd be happy to address them. So let's get into it. The business case for blockchain. We're going to cut through the jargon. We're going to get down to what I believe are the fundamentals that make blockchain valuable for businesses. So first, we're going to talk about the consensus mechanism, right? To me, the consensus mechanism is the real innovation behind blockchain, right? Anyone can build a transaction system, right? You can stand up a database and it can handle transactions, but that database can't handle them on its own continuously without human interaction. Blockchain can. Once you've got your blockchain up and running in a distributed fashion on different nodes around the world, it's incredibly resilient and it runs itself. As long as you are engaging in transactions, it understands how to handle the transactions. And it's self-repairing. If there's an issue, it will fix the issue. And as a result, we have this globally distributed, highly available, self-healing, self-managed database. That's great, right? Fundamentally, out of the box, we're talking about a really cool, useful technology. And then we build on top of that with other cool stuff that we do. It has a natural defense to attacks. You can't, which we'll talk about a little bit. You can't just change the database in blockchain. You have to participate in the blockchain to change the database, and you have to have colluders if you want to do something that's naughty. And a lot of these blockchains have very specific mechanisms in place, which we'll talk about, the consensus mechanisms a little bit here, which prevent those attacks and incorrect data from being added to your database. This stuff can even get around the internet shutdown of an entire country. You can have a blockchain that survives inside a country that is completely isolated from the outside internet, and then it can rejoin its external blockchain in a way once it comes back, once it's connected again. So things like this, right? You can have all of these things through the consensus mechanism that don't require interaction from a human being. This is automatic, right? If anybody's worked with a managed database before, especially one with cool features like global distribution, right? And automated resiliency, right? Automated failover, fault tolerance, things like that. Guaranteed no data loss. Those types of things are typically expensive in a managed database. You got to pay a little more to get those things. Blockchain, that's just the way it works. And in fact, that's one of the negatives, is that we've seen so much talk about things like Bitcoin, and Bitcoin uses what we call a proof of work consensus mechanism. And proof of work is computationally expensive. Let's be clear. There's no way around it. Something like Bitcoin, and we won't dwell on it too much, but it has no way to do it other than proof of work, which means it is going to increase its energy requirements endlessly as it continues to gain popularity, which means, obviously we have scale problems. Now, so a lot of people look at that and say, hey, look, Bitcoin is famously energy consumptive. Are all blockchains consuming that much energy? And the answer is a resounding no. Okay, absolutely not. Doesn't have to be that way. So these are the two consensus mechanisms these are the two primary consensus mechanisms that I would say are most widespread in blockchain today, right? On the left-hand side, we have the first consensus mechanism, which is proof of work. I won't explain exactly how this works, but essentially miners are competing to solve a puzzle fastest. And that may sound like an oversimplification. It's really not. The more miners there are, the harder the puzzle gets to solve. So this is a network that, as it increases in size, its computational requirements and energy requirements scale faster than it increases in size, which is not the way you want to do things. So in general, and I know, again, I may step on some toes here, we're moving away from proof of work, right? Proof of work is fine for an early stage blockchain that needs the security of proof of work's validation. But once you get to a stage where you can run another consensus protocol, you should be, because other consensus protocols like proof of stake on this right side, they are significantly less computationally expensive because they just don't add fake problems which require additional computation to solve. So proof of stake is a system, and there are other consensus systems that are also very low energy usage, but just as an example, proof of stake is a system in which various nodes stake amounts of the cryptocurrency, and as a result, their nodes are randomly selected to perform the validation on the next block, which results in essentially random choosing of who gets the next rewards. But what's important here is that proof of stake means extremely low energy consumption, even at massive scale. So we can have, the whole point of this slide, which I'm finally getting back to, is that we can have consensus mechanisms which do not rely on massive amounts of energy consumption. So blockchain does not have to be that massive energy consumer. It can be less expensive than that. So I wanted to talk about a case study when we're talking about consensus mechanisms. This is Helium. So some of you may have heard of Helium. I think it's a really cool idea. And I'll talk about why I think, from a business perspective, it's a cool idea. So first, let's talk about, what Helium is. Helium is a blockchain which their goal is to provide internet access, right? So Wi-Fi hotspots around the world, right? So to accomplish that goal, their consensus mechanism is proof of coverage. They call it proof of coverage. What that means is their partners sell devices which are special Wi-Fi routers, which also have a specific radio antenna in them, which can communicate with other Helium routers to determine where they are and how much Wi-Fi coverage they're providing. And they reward the network based on how much Wi-Fi coverage they are in fact providing. This is a really cool use case because it shows, one, that we can have very unique proof of or unique consensus mechanisms, which is really a core idea of understanding how this can apply to other use cases. But then additionally, when we look at how this works in practice, now Helium has a network of vendors who provide these pieces of hardware, which then they sell to users who then participate in the Helium network. These Helium users provide Wi-Fi services to those around them, and as a result, receive additional currency, which they can then exchange for US dollars, and they're paid for it. So this is an example of a business that's entirely based on blockchain, right? And in fact, I'm excited for it. I think it's got legs. They've already got several industry partners who have locations around the world. Those industry partners are providing those Helium hotspots. They're making money off of it. People in the area are getting Wi-Fi. It's a great deal. And it just goes to show the consensus mechanism can be a tool to incentivize the behavior that you want from not only your customers, but your business partners. So really interesting use case. I encourage you to check out Helium if you haven't already. Really cool little blockchain. I shouldn't say little, but they are a cool blockchain. Minneapolis. We have one from Minneapolis. I was actually born Minneapolis, St. Paul, so many years ago in 1991. So good to see you there, Thomas. Good to have you. So we talked about the consensus mechanism. The consensus mechanism gives us something we like to call trustlessness, or a trustless network, right? The fact that we have this automated consensus mechanism, and the consensus mechanism is almost always automated. The fact that we have this automated consensus mechanism and it's built into code means that you do not need humans in the loop in order to perform these transactions on the database, right? And that's what we're calling it. We're calling the blockchain a database because that's what it is fundamentally, right? We've got this database. You do not need a human in the loop to make transactions, to make sure things are running smoothly. But more importantly, when you're working with another business, I say this, so at the bottom, I say you can do this at scale. I guess I'll read it from the slide. With trustless services like blockchain, we can reduce cost, We can increase transparency, and we can increase speed in B2B transactions, business to business transactions. Now, not only can you do those things, but you can do those things at scale, you can do them out of the box, and this is the key part of this slide, everyone knows it, right? Everyone knows that these blockchain services are fundamentally trustless. They know how the technology works. They can find an expert who can explain to them the technology works. That means you can take a blockchain with a trusted consensus mechanism, right? And there are plenty we'll talk about. You can take a blockchain with a trusted consensus mechanism like Ouroboros from Cardano. You can run that consensus mechanism, and other people can transact on that consensus mechanism without trusting you in any way. They don't have to know anything about you or trust you in any way. They just have to trust the technology you're running on. And that's why this is really interesting. This idea of trustlessness in this space is only useful because everybody agrees that it's trustless, right? So keep that in mind. Thanks for introducing yourself, Phil. No problem being late to the party. Coming from Quebec, Quebecois over here. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Very nice to have you. So what does that mean, right? I guess one big aspect of this is it reduces costs. So I'd like to read another quote here from Chris Ballinger, the founder and CEO of Mobi. So Mobi provides IoT devices which track vehicles, right? So they're a mobility provider. So essentially, they're mobility automation is what they call it. So Chris said blockchains will increasingly impact the provisioning of mobility services since they enable business networks to reduce the cost of coordinating their activities. Mobi hopes to build a worldwide network of cities, infrastructure providers, consumers, and producers of mobility services in order to realize the many potential benefits of blockchain technology. Now, let's break this down, right? Not only does, in the first sentence, Chris believe that the blockchain will reduce costs, but in the second sentence, he talks about all the different partners and cities and infrastructure providers and consumers they're working with. All of those providers and partners and cities, they don't have to trust Mobi. They just have to trust the blockchain that Mobi runs on. And everything else is out in the open, right? They don't have to believe that Mobi is doing the right thing. They can look and see themselves. Don't trust, verify. You don't need to trust with blockchain. It's right there. Thanks for the clarification that I was pronouncing Quebecois correctly. Good to have you, Rohit, from Santa Clara. Don't eat the red mussels from Santa Clara. If anybody's seen the Santa Clarita Diet, good show, solid show, big fan. And I know it's not Santa Clara, it's Santa Clarita, but still. Patrick asks, will there be something technical or only advantages of blockchains? Yeah, we're going to focus on the business case for blockchains in this talk, Patrick. Now, I'd love to answer any questions you have about, why this is the case. But to be clear, we could talk if you want to get me up here and talk about explaining how these various technologies work, we could go for days. We could go for days, and then that would be only a couple of the blockchain technologies. So what I wanted to focus on in this talk today is the business cases for blockchain, so that you can understand and explain to your business partners and superiors in your workplace, your management, things like that, exactly why blockchains are useful. What are the fundamental use cases of blockchain without getting into all of the jargon and all of the technical details. So say it with me. Tokens are not coins. All right? Tokens are not coins. This is a common misconception with folks who are getting into the space. So they hear token, they hear coin. To them, they're interchangeable. Not the case. So on the left-hand side here, I have coins, which are digital assets native to a particular blockchain, right? They're defined by the blockchain itself, okay? So Bitcoin is a coin. Ethereum is a coin. The Binance network coin is a coin. Cardano's coin, ADA, is a coin. These are all assets which they're not assets, they are coins which are a part of the blockchain itself. In fact, each of these coins doesn't necessarily exist on its own. It only exists as a part of someone's wallet, so to speak. And that's why we can divide these coins up, and you can buy one thousandth of a Bitcoin or something like that, because there isn't an actual Bitcoin. It is an entity that lives on the blockchain. Now, on the other hand, we have tokens. Tokens are digital assets which are defined by a project or smart contract, and they're built on a specific blockchain, right? So now tokens are things like Tether, which is designed to peg to the dollar, right? So you can see its price on the right-hand side here is almost at $1. The reason it's not quite at $1 is they have to back the value of Tether, because Tether is a token, so they have to essentially add value into Tether in order to keep it priced at $1 or remove value depending on how the price of the dollar moves. Same with USD Coin, Binance USD. Those are designed to peg to a specific value. And in this case, it's the dollar. Wrapped Bitcoin, you can see that price is very close to the Bitcoin price. It's designed to be a proxy for Bitcoin's value. So tokens, and we're seeing tokens which are proxies for value right here, but tokens are not themselves a coin. Each token does have an ID. It is a unique individual thing, right? So tokens themselves are fundamentally different from coins. And we'll talk about that. So Phil asked, it's been a while since I have last connected to my DO portal. Are you now providing blockchain specific services? Great question. So managed blockchain is a big thing these days. I would recommend, there are a lot of providers that I could recommend that build on DO. Does DO provide managed blockchain services ourselves? Not at this time, but we do have partners in QuickNode. We're working with Thunderstake. We work with a lot of providers like Blockspaces. We work with Elrond, with Harmony, all sorts of organizations that are building managed blockchain services. And I'd be happy to provide recommendations if you want to chat about them afterwards. My email, I'm sure you saw in the talk, is dwilkin@digitalocean.com. You should always feel free to reach out. Also, feel free to contact our sales team. We'll share a link to that page afterwards, and they are very well versed in our partners, including our managed blockchain partners. So they can absolutely help you get set up with that. And to be clear, to Phil's point, you do not need, you do not need to stand this up yourself. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are providers who are experts in blockchain who will build this out for you, who can give you advice about how you can use various things and do all these sorts of things. And absolutely, they are experts. They're great, and they can get you stood up very quickly. And Phil, we do love to provide infrastructure. I think that's a space we see a lot of growth in. And like I said, blockchain is here to stay. It's definitely a technology which is not just a fad. There are aspects which may be fads, but blockchain itself is fundamentally useful. Talk a little more about tokens. So tokens can be so much more than a link to a picture or a proxy for cryptocurrency. So outside of DeFi, where they are primarily used as proxies for value or something like that, we have three primary uses, and you may disagree the specifics of what falls into what bucket here, but these are the three primary categories that I like to think of when I think of tokens on blockchains. One is governance tokens. Governance tokens allow holders to vote on changes to their parent chain, right? So this works like a board of directors. In fact, that's exactly the way it's designed. Governance tokens are designed to be able to enable you to create organizations on the blockchain which take advantage of the trustless nature of blockchain to run that organization, right? So which is a really cool idea. We'll talk about it in a second. Security tokens represent an off-chain asset, right? So the holder of a security token is the owner of that asset. Now, this is actually, there's some history here because they didn't used to be called security tokens, but they were doing things that the SEC essentially believed were the activities of securities. So as a result, there were some discussions had, and many tokens are now classified as security tokens if that token secures an off-chain asset, right? So what do I mean by that? You can have the deed to your house on the blockchain. You can have your entire supply chain on the blockchain. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can have any external asset represented by a token on the blockchain, and that's a really, really powerful tool. Utility tokens, the last category here, are redeemable through their parent blockchain in some way to provide services. An example of this that I like is pre-search, render, the render token. Render is a token that allows you to you can exchange render tokens with the render network to provide 3D rendering or other graphical rendering services. So essentially, it's these render tokens represent a certain amount of rendering work on the render chain, right? So a way that you can pay back to the chain for services you get out of that chain. Okay, so those are really cool services, sort of internal to their own chains. So I wanted to go with another quote here. Sorry for the bright orange, but this is from SGX. SGX sees blockchain technology as a way to bring innovation to our distributed financial marketplace, and we developed delivery versus payment capabilities for the settlement of tokenized assets across different blockchain platforms. And the part I want to focus on here, and this is Andrew Coy, head of blockchain technology at SGX. The part I want to focus on here is the settlement of tokenized assets, right? We're already getting into the point where this is already trader jargon. Tokenized assets is already like this fundamental part of these trading operations, and they're trading across blockchains, and we're putting more and more assets onto the blockchain every day. Think about it. If you can put your asset into a secure, globally distributed database, why would you have the deed to your house in the bottom of some drawer when you could have it on a globally distributed blockchain that nobody can break, right? That is completely trustless. So that's something that we're seeing, and obviously the deed to your house is a close example to everyone's heart, but not necessarily applicable to the way we're talking about assets on the blockchain here. We can talk about all sorts of assets on the blockchain, boxes, Ethernet cable is the bundle of Ethernet cable is an asset on the blockchain and is moving through a supply chain, things like that. All sorts of things can be assets on the blockchain, tokenized assets. So let's talk about smart contracts, which are a fundamental piece of how a lot of the work, the cool business work is done today on the blockchain. So think of a smart contract like a token. So it's a token on a particular blockchain, but it's made of code, right? It's made of code, and that code runs continuously on any smart chain that it exists on, right? So when we say smart chain, we mean a chain which is capable of smart contracts. An example of a chain that's not capable of smart contracts is Bitcoin, right? Which is one of the reasons Bitcoin is in a weird place right now, right? There are all these other chains which can do much more and don't require proof of work. And even Ethereum, which is a proof of work chain right now, to be clear, I don't want anybody to get confused. Ethereum is proof of work right now. However, they have a very public plan in place to move Ethereum to a proof of stake model because they also recognize that proof of work is not sustainable. So, so smart chains can run these smart contracts, and the smart contracts are just code. They're just code that will execute when certain conditions are met and will perform certain actions, right? So when I know what you're thinking. Okay, well, how do they actually know what's going on? Oracles, something called oracles. There's a service called oracles, which will provide reliable information to a blockchain, and it's agreed on ahead of time with the smart contract what the oracle will be, and that allows the smart contract to determine execution. We'll talk about kind of what that means, determining execution. What are the use cases for this in the next slide. They don't change. That's one advantage of smart contracts. Again, blockchain is immutable. You can't change an existing block, right? So I know what you're thinking. Okay, that sounds like a disadvantage. You're giving me a contract that can't ever be rewritten. Well, that's not necessarily true. You just void the old one, right? So you void the old contract and write a new one and add that new one to the blockchain. And then again, that new contract is again immutable. So that's fantastic. And then finally, with smart contracts, the one thing you should be aware of is everyone has access, right? A smart contract that's on a public blockchain, everyone can see that smart contract. Now, this can be a good thing in that it increases transparency. It can be a bad thing. Maybe you don't want all of your contracts to be publicly accessible. And there are ways to run private chains where you don't necessarily have it on the public internet for everybody to see, though when you get into running a private chain, you lose some of those benefits of that global distribution of a network. So what are they actually used for? What can we actually do with smart contracts? And to be clear, the 3 examples I have on this page are just 3 examples, right? Because smart contracts are essentially Turing complete, they can do anything. They can do all sorts of stuff, and we will see them doing all sorts of stuff in the future. But for now, I thought there were really 3 cool use cases that are immediately recognizable in terms of why they're useful, and we can talk about those. So flash loans, and the usefulness of this one is arguable, but it is cool. Flash loans can lend and repay millions of dollars from a blockchain in under a minute. How does that work? There are examples of this where a user will write a smart contract which will perform a trade essentially of a cryptocurrency, right? They can write a smart contract on Ethereum, take out a loan of $10 million from the Ethereum blockchain itself, and then buy one cryptocurrency with that $10 million, sell on another exchange for where the price is different, and take the delta of that money, keep that, and then pay the rest back to the Ethereum blockchain all in under 60 seconds. Now, if you write that contract, the smart contract is capable of determining whether or not it will be able to pay back the loan once it completes execution. And if it will, the smart contract, the flash loan, is valid. This isn't something that that I see a ton of solid business use cases for, but it is fascinating to me that this is the type of thing you can do with smart contracts, and I wanted to share that with you folks. DAOs, the second line item here, are blockchain-based companies. Now, this is something that you may have heard of before, and we talked about on the previous slide, governance tokens. Now, governance tokens are key to a DAO. Governance tokens allow the holders of those governance tokens to vote on what the DAO is doing, and that it could include folding the DAO, turning it, essentially dispersing it and destroying it. So absolutely, DAOs are very powerful tools. We'll talk about an example of a DAO next. Really cool stuff. And then insurance companies. This is one aspect that's really neat. So with an oracle, an insurance company can set up a policy, and a policy can essentially be a bunch of money that's locked up in a smart contract. This smart contract can have an oracle that tells it when the conditions of the insurance payout have been met and automatically unlocks that payout for its provider. As you can see, the use cases for this in something like credit default swaps, or other cases in which you're insuring an asset that has a publicly available value, things like that. Or you can have it in some cases. You can have it so that you insure the contents of a refrigerated truck, and if the temperature of the truck goes over a certain temperature for a certain period of time, the insurance is triggered automatically. The contents of that truck are covered under insurance and paid out on. So those are the really cool tools that you can run with smart contracts that allow you to do all sorts of really nifty things. So I wanted to go with another quote here to talk about this. Given our vast partner ecosystem, we are exploring the decentralization and immutable tracking benefits of blockchain for potential applications in our insurance business. We believe blockchain can improve the transparency and efficiency for stakeholders in these networks to transact while still maintaining an independently verifiable lineage of activities. Now, he used insurance lawyer talk here. But you can see the concepts that we've been talking about. By the way, this is Daniel Johnson, CTO and head of innovation at Guardian Life Insurance. So looking at the first couple of lines here, it says decentralization and immutable tracking benefits of blockchain, right? The fact that we can have this everywhere, we don't have to rely on a single data center, And we have the immutable tracking benefits, the fact that once something's on that blockchain, it can't be changed. We can always rely on that older data. We believe blockchain can improve the transparency and efficiency, right? We can see more and we can do more for stakeholders in those networks to transact while still giving them that trustless, immutable ledger of all previous activities that anyone can look back on at any time. It just opens everything up in terms of that conversation when you're working with two distinct parties who each have conflicting interests. In insurance, we talk about a concept called moral hazard all the time, and this is a way that that we can start to one of the ways we can in a way mitigate moral hazard. Okay, so I want to do a case study on a DAO, one that I thought was a cool case study. This is a DAO called Krause House. Right, so if you haven't heard of this, Krause House is a decentralized autonomous organization whose sole express purpose is to purchase an NBA team. So their idea is essentially if we get enough people to put money into this DAO, then we can then vote on the acquisition of an NBA team. Now, there are a lot of legal hurdles they got to get through to get to that point, but the idea is fundamentally sound. Some of you may have heard of a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company or corporation. This is essentially a SPAC for a basketball team. It is an organization that stood up with the sole purpose of collecting a bunch of money, which it can then use to purchase an organization, which then the owners of the DAO will own a stake in. So I'm fascinated by the Krause House DAO story, and I'm going to keep a close eye on it. I encourage you to do the same as well. I'm not personally an investor, but by all means, buy an NBA team. The last kind of use case that I wanted to focus on in terms of blockchain broadly is supply chain, right? They're so naturally aligned that they even share a word in their name. Blockchains and supply chains make so much sense, it almost doesn't really need an explanation, but I will explain it. So, in a supply chain, you want assets to move from party to party reliably, transparently, efficiently, and trackably, right? In a way that you can always look back and see exactly who had what, when, and where. If you were with me on that explanation of a supply chain, you just also described blockchain, right? They are that close together in terms of what they are trying to do. So we talk about tokenized assets, we talk about supply chains, hand in hand. I'm calling it. I'm making the call. If there's nothing else that blockchain successfully takes over as an industry, it will take over supply chains, and quickly. That's my one kind of pie in the sky prediction there. Why? Because you have a ledger that's shared with all parties, right? Critical in supply chains. You have entries which cannot be changed once they're added to the chain. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want when we're getting supply chains with 20 different links around the world. We want to know exactly who touched it and when, and consumers do too in many cases. And then assets can be tokenized to move off the chain, or to move on the chain, I should say. So you don't have to have something with existing, that's already on the blockchain. It doesn't have to be blockchain stuff. It can be anything outside of the blockchain. And we have a lot of companies that are building IoT devices, which you can put on a pallet or a truck, which will then track everything about that truck on the blockchain by check-ins at various points. So really cool technology, and I encourage you to check out if you're having supply chain issues, and transparency, efficiency, things like that are part of them. I encourage you to check out blockchain and supply chain blockchain solutions as an answer. Another quote here from Armin Nazat, the digital technology manager of Nestle Oceania. He said, "Transparency in supply chains is increasingly important to consumers who want to know what's in their food and where it comes from. While Nestle has begun to release information on supply chains for 15 key commodities, using blockchain technology enables more precise tracking." Now, we've heard of this. We've heard of blood diamonds and of companies getting their water from places they shouldn't be getting their water. With blockchain, we give the companies the tools to open up that whole supply chain, let customers see an individual water bottle, scan it, and see exactly how that water bottle traveled throughout the world, where it was filled, where it sat, how long it sat in various places. Does every company want to open up their supply chains to that much scrutiny from customers? Maybe not. But if you do, you may gain more consumer trust. So we'll see how that market turns out. I want to talk briefly about the risks of blockchain. One is the hype. Blockchain is powerful, but there is, a matter of fact, there is too much hype right now. It's not the answer to everything. Um, it solves a lot of problems, but it doesn't solve every problem. So a risk with the hype is that if you start a blockchain project right now, and the hype dies down, your project could face scrutiny. Some people could look at it and say, hey, is this just because of the hype? And now that we're seeing all this stuff fall by the wayside that was hyped up about blockchain, is this also going to be a waste of money? That's a risk you have to consider when you're opening up a new blockchain project right now. 6 months ago, easy. Right now, if we see this crypto slide continue, blockchain is going to be in the targets as well as as an enemy of the state, and could result in, if you push into a project for blockchain, if you do not have an ironclad business case, then you could be criticized later on for just giving into the hype. Don't want to do that. So make sure your business case is ironclad. Specialists are generally still required. You will likely need a third party. That's going to increase costs. However, those costs might be outweighed by the benefits of blockchain. McKinsey has a great article about this, about deciding whether or not blockchain is correct. And I believe I have the link, which I'll post in a minute here. But McKinsey has a great article about this where they talk about, hey, here are the decision points in adding blockchain to your supply chain, for example. And Thomas, thank you for that comment. Thomas said, I was in supply chain. Knowledge is king. Absolutely. Totally agree. And that's why I think blockchain is transformative in that space. But you are going to need specialists. You are going to need to, as Phil mentioned earlier, you're going to need that third party that works with you, that has a managed blockchain service that you can run on, that you can add into your services, things like that. So there is certainly stuff that needs to be considered. Just don't slap this stuff on. You need to think about it carefully. It costs money. And finally, a risk is over application. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is part of the hype, right? This is part of that hype part piece where we're trying to put blockchain on everything. But just keep in mind, we don't have to force blockchain in. Once blockchain, blockchain is suffusing all these industries right now, it's eventually going to become a technology just like web servers or message queues, things like that. It's going to be a service which we integrate into our other services. It's not going to be the point of our business services. It is going to be helping those business services. So, what's the future? What's next? And here I'd actually like to ask the audience if we've got any eyes still open out there, folks still awake. What do you think is something that I didn't talk about here, or something I did talk about here that you want to touch on additionally? What's something you see as a really interesting business case for blockchain moving forward, or a cool project in blockchain that you're working on, or that you've seen, or that you're invested in? Please refrain from just purely cryptocurrency stuff. Obviously, that's not necessarily a pure business case, but I'd love to hear if anybody out there has a project that they've been watching that they think is really neat. I'll start. I know we weren't going to talk about Web3 very much, but there's a cool organization called Constellation. They're building essentially web hosting services for Web3 apps. So if you want to check that out, if you are interested in Web3 and distributed web applications, Constellation provides incentives for users to host those distributed web applications on their blockchain, which is really interesting. So I'm seeing a couple of questions come through and mentions about things. So Manan said, do you think blockchain can help in e-prescription space? Absolutely, from a supply chain perspective. It is critical that we understand where medicine comes from, where that we're getting the right stuff. Now there are pretty good systems in place already when we talk about the pharmaceutical organizations in terms of supply chain tracking, making sure they have the right medications in the right places. In developed nations, at least, right? There certainly could be improvements to supply chains in areas where there aren't these massive existing pharmaceutical distribution networks. And I think that's certainly an area where blockchain is going to be useful. If you can get in these remote areas medicine and can verify exactly what that medicine is, where it came from, who it's prescribed to, things like that, that is incredibly valuable. And I think it's absolutely a good call out as a use case, Manon. Good call. Thomas and Baptiste both mentioned the same thing. Housing, buying and selling homes, right? So I mentioned earlier having the deeds to homes or properties tokenized as assets on the blockchain is a really, really interesting use case. And I think it's certainly possible that we could see an era in the not too distant future where selling your home is not the complex 45-day process that we have today. With blockchain, because it's so reliable, we can have a smart contract that says, hey, if these conditions are met, both people sign off, money is exchanged for deed. And that's it. It's done. We don't have to worry about all these legal hurdles. The deed belongs to somebody else as soon as that condition is met, and the money exchanges hands at exactly the same time on exactly the same contract. So really, really cool way to do things there. And I think cars are potentially also an area in which we'll see blockchain making a difference. Mios asks, how is blockchain different in e-prescription than government-owned and traditional system? And that's absolutely correct. So to be clear, Mios, I was talking about the fact that in developed nations, we certainly have existing strong supply chains for pharmaceutical organizations for making sure we get the right medicine to the right places at the right times. But that's not the case everywhere, right? There are certainly areas where it's more remote, where medicine is more difficult to get, where the supply chains are less reliable. And blockchain can enable you to rely on the medicine you're getting somewhere, even if you don't have the expertise to determine that it is in fact the medicine that you're hoping for. So I think that is certainly an area in which blockchain can help in more remote locales. And then Vic2 Clarion, I don't know how to say that, is said, the one I'm thinking of is using blockchain in agri projects to generate, trade, or transfer carbon credits. That is a really cool use case, and I've certainly heard of that. For anyone who's not familiar, a carbon credit is something that a company can purchase to offset their emissions, and usually the carbon credit is executed by an agricultural organization planting trees or planting another type of plant in an area that will pull carbon out of the air, and therefore we hope offset the pollution of that company. So carbon credits, absolutely something which can be tracked and traded on the blockchain, and I think that's a fascinating use case. Excuse me, good call, Vic. Thomas asked, is there a use case for games through blockchain, Pokemon Go or something similar? So this is something that some companies have already started trying to do, and actually Activision got a bunch of crap for it because they added NFT skins to their game, if I recall correctly. So this is something that, because there's a lot of hype around NFTs and the crypto apes and things like that, this got a bad rap. Right, it was not received well. I think there absolutely is a use case for this, right? And you mentioned Pokemon Go, Thomas. Think about Pokemon trading cards or other trading cards, right? Blockchain naturally fits with a trading card type of system, especially with electronic trading cards. So we can do all sorts of cool stuff with trading cards and with other things like that, and with any digital asset, right? So certainly I think there will be systems in which we see digital assets traded in terms of game, and you're rewarded digital assets for playing a game, and you sell those digital assets to others in the game, things like that. 100%, I think that's going to happen. Good call out. Hashan asked, do we always need a white paper if we are working on a new token for Polygon? So this is a good question. So what Hashan is talking about here is the idea of a white paper that describes exactly what you want to accomplish with a token. And so you'll see white papers also used for consensus mechanisms. When you're designing a new consensus mechanism, you'll usually write a white paper to describe the math behind your consensus mechanism. Tokens, as we talked about before, are defined by a smart contract typically, or some other aspect of the chain. Maybe the chain itself produces tokens, but the reason we typically see white papers, Hashan, is that when somebody sees your token, they want to understand what your token is for, because tokens have to have some purpose, right? Token isn't a cryptocurrency in which it just exists and it has a value based on whatever people will pay for it. A token is something which is created by the chain for a specific purpose. So with that in mind, you do need something that says this is the purpose of this token. Does it need to be as complex a white paper as everyone else's? That I don't know. I think it depends on who you're trying to get to use your token. Certainly a more impressive white paper will give people more confidence in your token. Let's see. So AVHDB asks, could blockchain be used for music, for distribution, or in the process of creation? And absolutely. And I think this gets into a more meta question of things like software supply chain, right? Software supply chain is big these days, and making sure that you preserve the digital rights to whatever you are shipping over the internet is critical. And absolutely, you can have it such that the rights to your music, you can tokenize your asset, your song, your copyright for that music, for example. And maybe the legal framework still doesn't exist, but you could certainly tokenize that asset and then trade that asset, sell that asset, give use of that asset to whoever you'd like through the blockchain. So I think that's absolutely valid. Let's see. I'm looking at other questions here. Lev asked, what do you see as possible obstacles? And I guess I'll switch to questions at this point, since we've been doing questions anyway. So Lev asked, what do you see as possible obstacles when shifting to proof of stake protocols? And that's a great question. And that is where we see problems for a chain like Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is proof of work, so is Ethereum. But people are optimistic about Ethereum because Ethereum has built within it the ability for it to change its consensus mechanism. Ethereum recognized when it was built that proof of work may not be the end all be all answer, and that some other consensus mechanism may end up reigning supreme. And as a result, they built into their platform the ability for the entire Ethereum blockchain to switch to proof of stake. Right now, it's a process. It's not short. They've got this whole big paper on how exactly they're going to do it to get to Ethereum 2.0. But the problem is, for something like Bitcoin, they don't have those mechanics in place to switch to a different consensus mechanism. They just can't. They just can't. So for Bitcoin, there's no path to shift to proof of stake. For Ethereum, it's a path. It's a complex path. However, I think as we see this paradigm more and more, start out in proof of work, because that gives you better security for a small pool, for a small node pool, then eventually move to proof of stake. I think this is going to become a common pattern for organizations who are building blockchains. And so I think we will see more clear paths of how to migrate between those styles of consensus. And we'll do one more question from Manan. Are there any projects that allow the end user mobiles as blockchain nodes with consent of users in place? Absolutely. In fact, depending on the network you use, some networks absolutely can perform consensus with the resources just on a mobile phone. I believe Ethereum is one of those cases in which you can run an Ethereum edge node, not necessarily a full node because that takes a lot of data, but you can run an edge node of Ethereum on a mobile phone, for example, and it can get proof of stake rewards based on that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. It's been a blast. I'm really glad we got so many questions and so much participation from the audience. Would love to hear your ideas for future talks you'd love to hear, for future topics that you think you'd tune in for, because that's why we do them. We love to see people tuning in and having a great time and learning something new. So please send those over. You've got my email. I'd love to hear from you folks, and please hit me up on LinkedIn as well. You can find me easily with my name. It's pretty unique. All right. With that, everyone have a wonderful rest of your week, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime in the near future.